The most powerful man in the city once canceled a meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars because I sneezed. When people hear that story now, they laugh. They think it is a joke. The truth is, nobody laughed back then. Especially not the executives who had been waiting for Ethan Blackwood in a conference room for almost an hour while he stood outside a ballroom asking whether I needed tea, water, or a doctor. But that night was still months away. Back then, I was simply the woman everyone loved to gossip about. My name is Lily Parker, and according to the people attending Blackwood Capital's annual gala, I was nothing more than the cruel CEO's latest toy. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers hanging 3 stories above the marble floor. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with sparkling drinks while New York's skyline glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Men in expensive suits discussed investments. Women in designer gowns exchanged carefully practiced smiles. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood me, wearing a simple navy dress I had purchased on sale 3 months earlier. I never belonged in places like this. I was an illustrator who spent most days drawing stories for children. My world was paint, pencils, coffee shops, and quiet afternoons. Ethan's world was private jets, billion-dollar acquisitions, and magazine covers. Yet somehow our lives had become connected. The problem was that nobody understood how. There she is. I heard the whisper before I saw the faces. Blackwood's favorite distraction. Another woman laughed softly. I give it 3 months. That long, someone replied. I pretended not to hear them. Experience had taught me that responding only made things worse. So I stood near one of the windows and focused on the city lights outside. The reflection in the glass showed dozens of guests moving through the ballroom. It also showed people staring at me when they thought I would not notice. Some looked curious. Others looked amused. A few looked openly judgmental. They all believed the same thing. They believed Ethan kept me around because he was bored. They believed I enjoyed the tension. They believed they knew my story. They were wrong. The sudden shift in the room happened exactly at 8 o'clock. Conversations lowered. Heads turned. Even the music seemed quieter. Ethan Blackwood had arrived. He entered the ballroom surrounded by senior executives and security personnel. Tall. Impeccably dressed. Completely unreadable. People stepped aside without being asked. That was the effect he had on a room. He acknowledged investors with brief nods, shook a few hands, accepted congratulations from board members. Then his eyes moved across the crowd and stopped on me. Everything else disappeared, at least for him. I watched it happen. The famous CEO who intimidated governments and dominated negotiations suddenly looked relieved simply because he found me standing beside a window. Several guests noticed too. The whispers immediately returned. Ethan ignored all of them. Without hesitation, he crossed the ballroom. One executive tried to stop him with a question. Ethan barely slowed down. Another attempted to introduce an important client. Ethan continued walking. The entire room watched as the most powerful man there headed directly toward the woman everyone had been mocking 5 minutes earlier. When he finally reached me, his expression softened in a way nobody else ever saw. You made it, he said quietly. I smiled. I told you I would. The tension in his shoulders immediately disappeared. Around us, dozens of people stared in confusion. And none of them understood that the man they feared most was already losing control over something far more dangerous than business. Me. The strange thing about Ethan Blackwood was that he never seemed to notice anyone. Not really. People spent years trying to earn his attention. Executives built careers around winning his approval. Investors waited months for 15 minutes on his calendar. Reporters chased him across continents hoping for a single quote. Most failed. Ethan had a reputation for being impossible to impress and even harder to approach. That reputation existed for a reason. The rest of the gala continued around us while he stood beside me near the windows overlooking Manhattan. Guests danced. Conversations flowed. Glasses clinked. Yet Ethan seemed entirely uninterested in any of it. Have you eaten? He asked. I stared at him. That is your first question? He shrugged slightly. You skipped lunch. My eyebrows rose. How do you know that? A faint smile touched his face. You sent me a photo of your sketchbook at 2:30. There was no food on the table. I laughed despite myself. Across the ballroom, several people watched us openly. Their confusion almost made me feel sorry for them. They expected romance, drama,
Skandal.
Instead, the terrifying CEO was worried about whether I had eaten lunch. "You are staring again," I told him quietly. Ethan glanced around the room. "Who?" I nearly laughed. "Everyone." His expression remained completely blank. "They will survive." That answer perfectly explained why nobody understood him. The world saw a ruthless businessman. They never saw moments like this. They never saw him remember small details that even my closest friends forgot. They never saw him show up at my apartment with soup when I caught the flu. They never saw him sit quietly for hours while I finished illustrations because he knew deadlines stressed me out. To everyone else he was cold. To me he was simply Ethan. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciated that difference. "There you are." The voice belonged to Victoria Hayes. She approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. Her emerald gown probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile looked friendly from a distance. Close it felt sharper. "Ethan, the board members are waiting." Ethan nodded politely. "I will join them shortly." Victoria's eyes shifted toward me. The smile remained. The warmth disappeared. "Of course." The silence stretched for a moment too long. Then she tilted her head slightly. "Lily, you must find these events exhausting." I recognized the trap immediately. "Not really." "That surprises me." Her tone remained perfectly pleasant. "Most people would struggle adjusting to this world." Around us, several nearby guests suddenly seemed very interested in their drinks. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. I could almost hear the assumptions forming. Ethan's toy. Ethan's distraction. Ethan's latest hobby. Victoria represented the voice behind all those rumors. Before I could respond, Ethan spoke. "Lily is doing fine." The temperature of the conversation changed instantly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Victoria noticed it too. "I was only being friendly." Ethan looked at her calmly. "Then be friendly." The silence that followed felt enormous. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Victoria forced a smile. "Of course." Then she excused herself and walked away. The surrounding guests quickly found reasons to look elsewhere. I exhaled slowly. "You did not have to do that." Ethan turned toward me. "Yes, I did." His voice was quiet. Certain. Absolute. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then one of his assistants hurried across the ballroom carrying a tablet. "Sir, the investors from London are ready." Ethan glanced at the screen before looking back at me. The assistant waited nervously. So did half the executive team standing nearby. Ethan ignored all of them. "Will you still be here when I am finished?" he asked. I smiled. "Probably." The tension immediately left his face. "Good." Then he finally walked away. As dozens of executives followed him toward an important meeting, I noticed something unusual. Every single person watching looked confused. Because they believed Ethan Blackwood controlled everything. None of them realized that the only thing capable of changing his entire day was a simple promise from me. People always ask when I first realized Ethan Blackwood was different around me. The answer surprises them. It was not at a gala. It was not in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan. It happened 5 years earlier in a place nobody would associate with a billionaire CEO. A small 24-hour diner outside Albany. Back then I did not know his name. I was 22 years old, working on illustration commissions and surviving on cheap coffee and determination. It was raining hard that night. The kind of rain that turned highways into rivers of headlights and reflections. I had stopped at the diner after delivering artwork to a client. The place was nearly empty. A truck driver sat near the counter. A college student studied in a corner booth. And a man in a dark coat occupied a table by the window. First I barely noticed him. He looked like someone carrying the weight of the world. His coffee sat untouched. His gaze remained fixed on the storm outside. Something about him felt lonely. Not physically alone. Emotionally alone. I remember ordering a slice of pie and opening my sketchbook. An hour passed. Then another. The rain continued. The truck driver left. The student packed up and went home. Eventually, only the man and I remained. When the waitress brought my check, she quietly nodded toward his table. He has been sitting there for 6 hours.
Jeg glansde over.
The man had not moved. Concern replaced curiosity. Maybe it should not have. Maybe I should have minded my own business. Instead, I tore a page from my sketchbook and drew a ridiculous smiling coffee cup wearing a superhero cape. Beneath it, I wrote a single sentence. Tough nights do not last forever. Before I could change my mind, I walked across the diner and left the sketch beside him. You look like you need this more than I do, I said. Then I left. That was it.
No dramatic conversation.
No exchange of numbers. No life-changing speech. Just a drawing and a stranger walking back into the rain. I forgot about the encounter within days. He did not. 5 years later, I learned what happened after I left. Ethan had been experiencing the worst period of his life. His father had passed away unexpectedly. The company was struggling. The board doubted him. Reporters questioned whether he could lead. According to Ethan, that little drawing remained in his wallet for nearly a year. I thought he was exaggerating the first time he told me. Then he showed it to me. The paper was worn and folded from being carried everywhere. I still remember staring at it in disbelief. The same sketch. The same terrible drawing. The same silly message. You kept this? I had asked. Ethan looked almost embarrassed. It reminded me to keep going. That conversation happened long before the gala. Long before the rumors. Long before people started calling me names. Nobody in the ballroom knew any of that. They saw a powerful CEO paying unusual attention to an ordinary woman. They never saw the lonely man in a diner holding a piece of paper, because a stranger showed him kindness when he needed it most. As I stood near the window that evening watching Ethan across the room leading investors through another successful presentation, I noticed something familiar. Every few minutes, his eyes searched the crowd until they found me again. And every single time they did, the same expression appeared. Relief. As if some part of him still remembered that rainy night. As if some part of him was still afraid that if he looked away too long, the person who helped him survive it might disappear. After that night at the diner became part of my story, I assumed it would remain something simple and private. A quiet moment between two strangers who would never meet again. I was wrong. Because Ethan Blackwood does not forget anything that changes him. And apparently I had changed him more than I realized. In the present, standing in that glittering ballroom full of people who believed they understood everything about us, I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. It was never random when Ethan appeared beside me. It was never coincidence when his attention shifted away from a negotiation mid-sentence, or when his schedule suddenly rearranged itself around events I attended. I used to think it was control. Now I was not so sure. Across the room I watched Victoria Hayes lean toward a group of investors, her smile perfectly timed, her words carefully shaped. She had spent months constructing a version of me that suited her narrative. The CEO's distraction. The mistake. The outsider who did not belong. I had heard enough fragments of those stories to stop caring. At least I told myself I had stopped caring. You are being talked about again, a voice said beside me. I turned slightly. Ethan had returned without me noticing. He stood close enough that his presence immediately changed the space around me. Calm. Controlled. Yet undeniably focused on me. I always am, I replied quietly. He did not look amused. That does not make it acceptable. I exhaled softly. It is just noise. Ethan studied me for a moment. Noise becomes dangerous when people start believing it. I almost laughed. People already believe it. That made him pause. The expression on his face shifted slightly, something sharper forming beneath the surface. Before he could respond, Victoria approached again, this time with two senior board members following her. Ethan, she said smoothly, we need you for a brief discussion regarding the upcoming merger presentation. Ethan did not move immediately. His attention remained on me. That alone was enough to make the surrounding conversations quiet down again.
Victoria noticed.
Everyone noticed. Finally, Ethan nodded once. Give me a moment. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. She stepped away with the others, but not before casting a glance at me that carried far more meaning than politeness. When they were out of earshot, I lowered my voice. You should not ignore them for me. Ethan tilted his head slightly. I am not ignoring them for you. I frowned. Then why? His answer came without hesitation. Because I choose what matters in a room like this. The simplicity of it unsettled me more than any dramatic declaration could have. I looked away toward the city skyline beyond the glass walls. Manhattan shimmered beneath evening light, alive with motion and ambition. People think I do not belong here, I said quietly. Ethan followed my gaze. Do you think that? I hesitated. Sometimes. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lowered. You do not understand what people see when they look at you. I turned slightly. And what do they see? His expression softened just barely. They see the only person in this entire building I do not have to pretend with. The words landed differently than I expected. Before I could respond, a sharp commotion rose near the entrance of the ballroom. Security shifted. Conversations broke mid-sentence. A new presence had arrived. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan's posture changed instantly. Not defensive. Not angry. Just alert in a way I had never seen before. And for the first time since I met him, I realized there was someone else in the world who could pull his attention away from me without effort. Someone from the past I had never been told about. Someone who, judging by the sudden silence in the room, was about to change everything I thought I understood about him. The moment the room changed, I felt it before I saw it. It was not just noise or movement. It was recognition. The kind that spreads through a space when someone important enters and everyone else becomes aware of their own insignificance. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the music from the string quartet seemed to lose its rhythm. Ethan did not look at me anymore. His entire attention shifted toward the entrance. Slowly I turned. A woman stood at the edge of the ballroom. She was elegant in a way that did not need explanation. Dark hair styled perfectly. A deep red dress that caught the light with every subtle movement. She did not look surprised to be there. She looked expected. And then I saw Ethan's expression change. It was subtle at first. A tightening of his jaw. A stillness in his shoulders. But I had learned enough about him to recognize that stillness. It meant everything else had stopped. The woman began walking forward. People instinctively moved aside to let her pass. Not because she demanded it. Because she assumed it. As she approached, I noticed Victoria Hayes suddenly straighten. Her earlier confidence replaced by something more uncertain. Ethan, the woman said softly when she finally reached us. Her voice was calm. Familiar. Too familiar. He did not answer immediately. For the first time since I had met him, Ethan Blackwood looked like he was trying to decide between two versions of reality. Elena, he said at last. The name settled into the air like something unfinished. My stomach tightened slightly, though I did not fully understand why. The woman, Elena, finally looked at me. Not with hostility. Not with curiosity. With recognition that felt older than the room itself. So this is her, she said quietly. No one else spoke. Ethan finally moved, just enough to position himself slightly closer to me without thinking about it. Was instinct, not performance. Why are you here? He asked Elena. There was no anger in his voice, only control, the kind that comes from carefully containing something fragile. Elena tilted her head slightly. You did not answer my call. Ethan's expression darkened slightly, not with emotion but with memory. That does not answer my question. She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. I thought you should know I am back in New York. Silence followed. Around us, people pretended not to listen, which only made them listen harder. I could feel the weight of assumptions forming again. Stories being rewritten in real time by people who knew none of the truth. Ethan finally exhaled slowly. You should have told me before coming here. Elena glanced at me again. I tried. But I was told you were unavailable. Her gaze lingered a second too long. Clearly, that is no longer accurate. I felt something shift in the air between them. Not romance. Not familiarity in the way people wanted to believe. Something far more complicated. History. Ethan's voice dropped slightly. This is not the place for this conversation. Elena nodded once. Then when? Before he could answer, Victoria stepped forward. unable to remain silent any longer. Ethan, the investors are waiting. We cannot delay the presentation any further. But Ethan did not look at her. He was still watching Elena. Or maybe he was thinking. Finally, he turned slightly toward me. And in that moment, I understood something I had not expected. This was not about jealousy or betrayal. It was about unfinished pieces of a life I had never been told existed. I will explain later, he said quietly to me. I studied his face. You always say that. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or frustration. This is different. I almost asked how. But Elena answered before I could. He is right, she said softly. It is very different. Ethan's attention snapped back to her immediately. Stop. The word was quiet, but firm enough to cut through everything. Elena paused. For the first time, her confidence slipped slightly. Not much. Just enough to be noticed. You cannot avoid it forever, she said. Ethan did not respond. Instead, he finally turned to me fully. The entire ballroom faded behind him in that moment. Stay here, he said gently. Not as a command, as a request. Then he walked away with Elena toward a quieter corner of the room, leaving me standing in the middle of a world that suddenly felt like it had too many hidden doors I had never been allowed to open. The moment Ethan walked away with Elena, the entire world around me felt slightly out of alignment, as if the ballroom had shifted into a version of itself I had never been shown before. Conversations resumed slowly, but not normally. People were no longer pretending they were not watching. They were openly watching now, pretending only to look elsewhere when they were caught. I stood near the window where Ethan had left me, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. It was not jealousy, at least not in the way people usually define it. It felt more like being placed in a story halfway through a chapter. Victoria Hayes passed behind me, close enough that I could hear her voice as she spoke quietly to one of the board members. Interesting timing, she said. I did not turn around. What do you mean? I asked without looking at her. A soft laugh followed. Ethan Blackwood does not bring personal history into public spaces unless it matters. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Because I already knew Ethan did not do anything without purpose. That was exactly what made this moment so unsettling. Across the ballroom, I could still see him speaking with Elena in a more isolated corner near the staircase. Their conversation looked calm, but their expressions were not. Not completely. Elena was speaking more than he was. Ethan was listening in a way I had not seen him listen to anyone else. Not even me. That thought should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it created something quieter. Uncertainty. Victoria appeared beside me again, this time slower, more deliberate. You really do not know, do you? She asked softly. I finally turned toward her. Know what? She studied my face carefully, as if measuring how much truth I could handle. Ethan and Elena were engaged 5 years ago. The words did not land immediately. First they felt like background noise, something irrelevant. Then they became heavier. Real. I did not respond. Victoria continued anyway. She left the country suddenly. No explanation. No closure. Just gone. Her expression carried something close to satisfaction, though she tried to hide it behind concern. People like Ethan do not forget things like that. I looked back toward the staircase. Ethan was still there. Still speaking with her. Still existing in a part of his life I had never been allowed to see. Victoria's voice softened. You were never meant to be part of that history. That sentence should have felt cruel. But instead it felt like distance. Like something already true long before she said it. I did not answer her. Because at that moment Ethan turned his head slightly. Not toward Elena. Toward me. Even from across the room I felt it. That quiet awareness he always had of where I was. His eyes met mine for only a second. But in that second something shifted in his expression. Not guilt. Not apology. Something more complicated. As if he was realizing I was watching a version of him I had never been told existed. Then he looked away again. And I understood something very clearly for the first time. I was not standing in the middle of a love story. I was standing in the middle of something unfinished. Something that had started long before I ever met him. And something that might not be fully mine to understand yet. The realization did not push me away from him, but it changed the ground beneath me, because now I knew. The world did not see me as his toy. They saw me as a replacement for something they believed he had already lost. And I was beginning to wonder if they were right. The silence after Victoria's words followed me longer than I expected. Even as the gala continued around me, laughter returning in soft waves and glasses clinking like nothing had changed, I felt like I was standing slightly outside of reality. Ethan Blackwood and Elena. Engaged. 5 years ago. The words repeated themselves in my mind without permission. Not because I had feelings of betrayal, but because I had never once imagined I was stepping into a space that already had history carved into it so deeply. I stayed near the window, pretending to observe the city lights, but in truth I was watching reflections of the ballroom behind me. Watching him. Watching them. Ethan and Elena were still speaking near the staircase. Not close anymore, but not distant either. There was a rhythm between them that did not belong to strangers. Even if their words were calm, their silence carried weight. I noticed the smallest details. The way Elena's hands moved as she spoke, controlled but slightly tense. The way Ethan's posture remained composed, yet his attention never fully left her. It was not romantic in the way people assumed. It was something heavier. Something unfinished. Something unresolved. "You are thinking too much." The voice came from beside me again. Victoria had returned, as if she enjoyed standing too close to my thoughts. I did not look at her. "You seem to enjoy telling me what I am thinking," I said quietly. A faint smile appeared in her tone even if I could not see her face. "It is not difficult. You are visible right now in a way you were not before." That sentence bothered me more than I expected. "What does that mean?" I finally asked. Victoria took her time answering, as if choosing each word carefully. "It means you are no longer just a rumor. You are now part of a pattern." I turned slightly toward her. "A pattern?" She nodded subtly toward Ethan and Elena. "Every version of Ethan Blackwood has a past. Most people never see it because he does not allow it to surface." Her gaze shifted back to me. "But when it does, it usually changes everything around him." I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the edge of my clutch bag. "Why are you telling me this?" Victoria's smile softened, but it was not kind. It was observant. "Because you are standing in the middle of it now." Before I could respond, movement near the staircase drew attention again. Ethan had stepped slightly away from Elena, not fully leaving her presence, but creating distance that felt deliberate. His eyes scanned the room once more, and again they found me. This time the expression was different. Not relief. Not calm. Something closer to internal conflict. He said something to Elena I could not hear. She did not stop him. That alone felt meaningful. Then Ethan began walking toward me. Slowly. Not with urgency. Not with hesitation either. Just certainty mixed with something I could not yet name. Conversations nearby began to fade again as people noticed his direction. Victoria stepped back slightly, as if sensing she no longer belonged in this moment. Ethan stopped in front of me. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. The distance between who he was before Elena arrived and who he was now felt smaller and larger at the same time. "We are leaving," he said quietly. I blinked. "Now." He nodded once. I glanced toward the staircase where Elena still stood. She was watching us. Not with anger. Not with sadness. With understanding that made my chest tighten for reasons I could not explain. "What about her?" I asked. Ethan did not look back. "She is not the reason I am here." That answer should have clarified everything. Instead, it complicated it further. He extended his hand slightly, not demanding, not pulling. Just offering. "Come with me." Around us, the ballroom continued to watch. Whispering. Judging. Trying to rewrite a story they still did not fully understand. I looked at his hand. Then at his face. And for the first time since I met Ethan Blackwood, I realized the real question was not who Elena was, or what people believed about me. The question was what kind of truth I was willing to step into, if I took his hand in front of everyone watching. My hand froze in the air for a moment. Ethan's offer was simple, yet it carried the weight of everything happening around us. The entire ballroom seemed to shrink into the space between his hand and mine. Behind him, people were still watching, still waiting, still trying to make sense of a story they had already decided belonged to them. Elena remained near the staircase, her expression unreadable from this distance. Victoria stood somewhere behind me, silent for once, as if even she understood that something important was shifting in real time. Ethan did not look away. He never did when it mattered. "If I leave with you now," I said quietly, "everyone will think they are right about me." A faint tension passed through his jaw. Let them think what they want. That answer should have been simple. But nothing about this situation felt simple anymore. I lowered my gaze briefly to his hand again. The same hand that had signed billion-dollar agreements without hesitation. The same hand that had once been described in financial magazines as decisive and unshakable. Yet right now it was just a hand waiting for me. Not commanding. Not forcing. Waiting. I heard footsteps behind me, but I did not turn. I did not need to. Victoria's voice remained silent. Even she seemed to understand that this moment did not belong to her narrative anymore. I exhaled slowly. Then I placed my hand into his. The reaction around us was immediate. Not loud. Not dramatic. But unmistakable. A shift in energy. A collective understanding that something had just been decided without permission from the room. Ethan closed his fingers gently around mine. Not tightly. Just enough to make it clear I was no longer standing alone. "Good choice," he said softly. I looked at him. It was not a choice people will understand. His expression softened slightly. People rarely understand anything worth doing. We turned together. As we walked away from the center of the ballroom, I felt dozens of eyes follow us. I did not look back. But I knew Elena was still there. Still watching. Not angry. Not surprised. Just quietly accepting something she already understood long before I did. That I was no longer an outsider in Ethan Blackwood's world. I was now part of the part he refused to leave behind. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, dimmer, almost unreal after the brightness we had just left. Ethan finally slowed his steps. Not stopping completely. Just enough to give space for what came next. "I owe you an explanation," he said. I let out a small breath. "You have said that before." A faint trace of guilt crossed his face. "I know." We continued walking. The sound of the gala faded behind us like a distant echo. "Elena is not what you think," he said after a long pause. I glanced at him. "Then what is she?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer could have. "She is someone I failed to protect once," he finally said. The words were quiet, controlled. But they carried something heavy beneath them. I did not respond immediately. Not because I did not believe him, but because I was beginning to understand that Ethan Blackwood's past was not a simple story of romance or loss. It was something far more complicated. Something that still had influence over his present. Over me. We reached the end of the corridor where the private elevator waited. Ethan pressed the button without speaking. As we stood there waiting, I realized something unsettling. The people inside that ballroom believed they had just witnessed a scandal. A CEO choosing a woman over his past. But what I felt instead was something far more uncertain. I was not stepping into a finished story. I was stepping into a continuation of one that had started long before I ever met him. And somewhere behind us, in that room filled with crystal light and whispered rumors, Elena Blackwood was still standing in the place where Ethan's life had once taken a different path. The elevator doors closed with a soft sound that felt louder than it should have in the silence between us. The mirrored walls reflected both of us, standing too close in a space that felt smaller than the truth we were about to step into. Ethan did not speak immediately. His hand was still loosely around mine, not holding tightly anymore but not letting go either. The numbers above the doors began to rise, each floor carrying us farther away from the ballroom, farther away from the version of him everyone else believed they understood. I could still feel the weight of Elena's presence behind us, even though she was no longer in sight. It was not jealousy that lingered inside me. It was uncertainty. Not about him, but about the space he had never shown me before. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly. "You deserve to know the truth," he said quietly. I looked at his reflection instead of directly at him. "Then start from the beginning," I replied. A long pause followed, as if even he was deciding where the beginning actually was. Elena and I were engaged, he said at last. 5 years ago. I nodded slightly. That part one already knew. It was not what people think it was, he continued. His voice remained steady, but there was something restrained underneath it. My father was dying at the time. The company was unstable. Everything I was trying to hold together was falling apart faster than I could control. I stayed silent, listening. Elena came from a family that had influence over the board, he said. The engagement was never just personal. It was strategic. Pressure from both sides. Stability for the company. Protection for the future. The elevator continued rising. Neither of us moved. Then she left, I said softly. Ethan nodded once. She was not ready for the world that came with it, or the version of me that existed inside it at that time. He paused. When she left, I did not stop her. That sentence carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. I finally turned toward him. And now she is back. He met my gaze directly. Yes. I studied his face carefully, searching for something hidden. But there was nothing unclear in his expression. Only honesty. And something that looked like exhaustion. Does she still matter to you? I asked. The question hung between us without interruption. Ethan did not answer immediately. That silence was enough to make my chest tighten slightly, though I did not let it show. Then he finally spoke. She matters, he said, because she is part of a life I do not deny. Another pause. But she is not the reason I am standing here with you. The elevator slowed slightly as it approached another floor, the soft mechanical hum filling the space around us. I looked away for a moment, trying to process what that meant. Not because I did not believe him, but because belief did not erase complexity. People think I am your distraction, I said quietly. Ethan's expression tightened slightly. People are wrong. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The elevator reached the top floor and stopped smoothly. The doors did not open immediately. Ethan stepped slightly closer, just enough that the reflection in the mirror no longer separated us clearly. I never planned for any of this, he said. Not you. Not the rumors. Not the way people see us. His voice lowered. But I also cannot pretend that what I feel when you are near me is not real. I looked at him then directly this time. And what do you feel? A faint, almost unreadable expression passed across his face. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty. Something more vulnerable than either. Like I am finally breathing normally, he said quietly. The elevator doors opened. Outside, the hallway was empty, lit softly by warm lights that contrasted with the intensity of everything that had just happened behind us. Ethan stepped out first, then turned slightly as if waiting for me to decide whether I would follow. I took a step forward, then another. As I moved past the threshold, I realized something that had been forming slowly since the moment I entered his world. This was no longer about being seen as someone's toy. It was about understanding that every person in Ethan Blackwood's life carried a history that shaped him in ways the world would never fully understand. And now I was part of that history too, whether the world accepted it or not.